Some stories break you, some heal you, but here at My 90s Love Story, we're here to fill your heart. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. You're about 6 weeks along. Do you want to keep it? The doctor asked it the way she asked everything, then dropped her head to look at the waiting list while she waited on my answer. I lowered my eyes and, without thinking, smoothed my hand over my still flat stomach. I couldn't stop the shiver that ran the length of me. I had no way to answer that question right then. I picked up the handbag beside me, said, "Thank you, doctor," and walked out. A gift, when it comes at the right time, is a gift. When it comes at the wrong time, it turns into a burden. This child arriving was like a door swinging open onto some hollow stretch of time, cracking apart 12 years of love and hate. And the cold wind felt like it wanted to knock me flat. Because before long, the child Grant had ached, for all these years would only become a burden again. Back then, Grant was young, and no one could have guessed how the rest of his life would go. Only the 18-year-old Grant, back straight under a bright blazing sun. I lifted my head and asked him, "What are you thinking about? Why do you look so far away?" He bowed his head, his thick lashes trembling. "Remember my wish." "What wish?" He said it grandly. "Madeline, in this whole life I have exactly one wish. And you can't even remember it? How could a person have only one wish for a whole lifetime?" "You're lying to me." Grant's one lifelong wish at 18, I didn't understand it until I was 22. Out of pure instinct, I picked up my phone, wanting to call Grant. Since our fight the year before, this was the first time I was the one calling him. But a second later, the phone rang only twice before he cut it off. I sat there a little stunned, staring at the screen. Just then a notification slid in, the headline loud and glaring. Serena Sutton and her boyfriend, close and cozy at an exclusive villa district. I swallowed the sickness rising in my chest and, with shaking fingers, tapped it open. Serena never dared make anything about Grant public. Now and then a post would hint at it, but she never dared hand the media a clear, front-facing photo of him. In the picture, you could see Serena's face plainly, but the man showed only half of his back. Nothing you could recognize, certainly not Grant, and yet the hand in that photo wore a plain ring on the ring finger. Next to all of his expensive things, that ring was cheap, humble, not worth a second glance. But a ring that ordinary was one I had saved up for through my first year of work, dressing plainly and eating cheap, until after about half a year, I could finally buy it. Even when we married, by then Grant had money, countless companies in his name. We still use this same pair of rings to make our vows. Grant, do you take Madeline to be your wife, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to stay faithful to her, to love and cherish her until the day you leave this world? I sat on the ice-cold iron chair outside the clinic and laughed at myself. And the ache in my chest wouldn't let up. These past years, Grant's business had only grown. The assets in his name were beyond counting. We lived in a basement once, then in a cramped, shabby rented room, and now we lived in a luxury villa. After that day, it wasn't Grant I ended up waiting for. It was someone else. It happened at a small get-together, just a few of Grant's friends. I never did figure out how Serena got into the party. She cornered me in the hallway, and the instant she saw me, she was clearly startled, then curled her lip. Men really are trash. However pretty the flower is at home, they still can't resist snacking somewhere else. It was the first time she'd ever met me. It was not the first time I'd seen her. She was a famous star, adored by thousands. Her face was everywhere I turned. Before I could open my mouth, a mocking voice came from behind her. "So you do know your place? You know you're just an outsider who wandered in?" The moment the words landed, Serena clearly realized she'd spoken without thinking, and her face went as ugly as a face can get. I turned to look. The man who'd spoken was Grant's oldest friend, Damon Quinn. These days, also Grant's business partner. I looked at him and gave a small smile. my way of saying thanks. This wasn't the first time Serena had come at me. 2 years earlier, she'd called me once. When the call connected, she asked, pleased with herself, "Grant, you're going to divorce your wife and marry me, aren't you?" I understood at once that she was only trying to flaunt her power. From the other end of the line came the rustle of clothing, and the next second I heard Grant's voice, cold and out of patience. "Serena, have you no shame at all? Get away from me." Back in the hallway, she blocked my path and raised a brow. "Madeline, you and Grant have clawed at each other for so many years. Whatever was between you died a long time ago. In the end, you just torment each other, and it's ugly. Why won't you let go and make room for the two people who actually love each other?" I smiled a little and bit off each word. Love each other. She hugged her arms to her chest, arrogant and smug. That's right. Grant and I truly love each other. In love, the one who isn't loved should step aside on her own. So, Madeline, you should be the one to withdraw. I looked at her coldly, ready to strip the mask off this shameless little homewrecker, who somehow still had her chin in the air. Grant and I are husband and wife. Whether we live or die, come together or fall apart, even if we torment each other for the rest of our lives, it is not some mistress's place to weigh in. You stand in front of me this smug and tell me to withdraw. On what grounds? She flinched back a step as if I'd scared her, put a hand on her own stomach, and lifted her voice. On the grounds that I'm carrying his child. My eyes went, without my permission, straight to her belly. In that instant, Serena's voice seemed to spiral through my skull, over and over, until it pierced clean through my heart. Pregnant? Pregnant? A haze came over me, and the whole world seemed to tip upside down. She saw me freeze, and her brows shot up as she rushed on. You two have been married all these years without a single child. In my belly is his firstborn. Go ahead. Guess whether he'll marry me for this child. Suddenly, I laughed out loud. For a moment, everything in front of me felt utterly meaningless, and all the strength drained out of me, my arms and legs going soft. Damon beside me reached out to steady me. You all right? I smiled at him. Did you hear that, Grant? His firstborn? Damon pressed his lips together and said nothing. Just then, footsteps came up behind Serena. Someone seized her by the hair and yanked hard. Who told you to come here? Tired of living? Serena shrieked and burst into tears. Grant, I didn't mean to. I'm carrying your child. Your child. Don't you care even a little? Grant looked at her, his face dark, and let out a cold laugh. You're sure it's mine? Then, icily, get out. Serena covered her head, not daring to steal even a glance at him, and stumbled off out the door. After she left, the empty hallway held only the three of us. Silence spread through it. Then, all at once, Grant tilted his head toward Damon. Damon, you're in love with Madeline. Damon's face flushed red, and his words tangled up. You, what nonsense are you talking about? Grant ignored him. His ink-dark eyes stayed fixed on me, but he spoke to Damon. Even if you are in love with her, it's useless. Madeline is my wife. For the rest of her life, she can only be with me. And with that, he turned and walked out. I watched Damon go after him, lowering his voice to reproach him. Grant, if you keep this up, aren't you really afraid Madeline will divorce you? The two words, divorce you, seemed to jolt Grant. His steps stopped, and it was a long moment before he answered. She won't do that. I looked at the text Damon sent to my phone. This bastard is counting on the fact that you love him. That's the only reason he isn't afraid. Damon was a playboy, notorious for it, still unmarried at his age, saying he never wanted to be tied down, never wanted to lose his freedom. Even Damon thought Grant was a bastard. So how was I supposed to be certain Grant still loved me? It was only later that I learned. Everything had his shadow in it, and my eyes had nowhere to hide. Back then, I was loud and eager and liked to show off, and no one thought Grant would fall for me. But he kept following me anyway, patiently, one step behind. He wasn't afraid of the teachers pulling him aside for a talk. He confessed right out in the open. So what if I like Madeline? What does that have to do with her? If you want to punish someone, punish me. She doesn't know a thing. What do you mean dating too young? There's nothing to it. It's one-sided. I'm still the one chasing. How happy I was then, the corners of my mouth tugging up, my eyes full of a smile, secretly holding on to the hem of his shirt. Grant, calm down. Just focus on studying. Grant, in his black windbreaker, stood there in that lazy slouch of his and looked down at me, his hair falling naturally across his eyes, narrow and long, the corners tilted up. No, Damon told me there's a whole crowd of boys in this school pining after you. I have to let them know to back off. And how arrogant he was. One hand in his pocket, standing at the front of the room, two fingers rolling a piece of chalk, casually solving a math problem no one else could crack, working it out and explaining it to the class at the same time. Let line XM and line FC meet at point E. The moment he finished, the room broke into cheers. Grant turned to look at me. The late sunlight poured in from the doorway, but he never saw me duck behind my books, the tips of my ears going red. Back then, the spring wind was gentle and full of a young girl's dreams, and that same wind slipped through the white shirt of the boy in front of me. Everyone envied us. They said we were made for each other, born to be together, sure to last a long, long time. I smiled toward him, so happy inside I could hardly hold it. Back then, he spoiled me endlessly. In the middle of the night, all I had to say was that I wanted to eat something, and the next morning he'd be standing under my dorm with the food, waiting. In college, we were like every other couple in the world, stuck together like glue. When his kiss got close, I'd huff and push him off. You're always coming to find me. I can't get any studying done. If I fail my finals, don't even think about seeing me. Grant would smile sheepish. Sorry, it's my fault. Come on, let's go to the library. You work your problems and I won't say a single word, okay? We were the kind of naive that made other people envious enough to grind their teeth. In our third year of college, Grant's father fell ill and died, and the company slid into ruin. His mother, hounded to the edge by creditors, swallowed a bottle of pills one night and was gone. The favored child of heaven dropped straight into the mud. For almost a month, I couldn't get to see Grant. Then one day he came out of that room, his body gaunt and hollowed out, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Leave, I don't want to drag you down with me." I gritted my teeth and glared at him. What do you think I liked you for? Your money, your family name, Grant, you idiot. My eyes went red, and the tears fell one after another. No matter how I wiped them, they wouldn't stop. He stepped forward, bent down, and gently wiped my tears away. Don't cry, Maddie. I can't bear to let you go. But how could I dare keep you beside me like this? Grant was alone then, with no bright road ahead of him. But no matter what, his wish never changed. Even then, Grant still wanted to grow old with Madeline, a house full of children. When Grant was scraping to build his business and money was tight, I quietly took my mother's dowry money and gave it to him. After he learned where the money had come from, he leaned his head on my shoulder, and with one hand pressed against the back of my neck so I couldn't turn to look at him, he said, "Silly girl, even if I'm good for nothing, I won't sink so low as to use this money of yours. Hold on to it. One day it'll be needed." Then, just as his business was taking its first breath, an investor decided to make things hard for him. One shot of liquor was worth $100,000. That night, he drank his way to $2 million in funding, and his stomach, already ulcerated, put him in an ambulance. In those days, he was often busy until the middle of the night. Sometimes he'd be up until dawn, and the pain in his stomach would flare. and he'd come into the bedroom to find me, pressing his ice-cold face into my palm and calling out, low and pitiful, "Maddie." I sleep like the dead, and yet, the first time he called, I'd wake. When he was worn out, he'd bury his head in my lap and close his eyes to rest, and I'd gently rub his stomach with one hand and pat the back of his neck with the other. His short black hair, cut clean and neat, every strand of it, that was my favorite place. He told me, "Maddie, I will never make you regret coming with me." Later, on a snowy mountaintop with wind cold enough to cut to the bone, I played music for him. And at a turquoise bay full of rolling waves, Grant's proposal shook the whole world. Countless strangers online dug like mad to find out who the woman was. After that huge, sweeping proposal, "Madeline, will you marry me?" How did I answer back then? I remember a pair of eyes, everything in them only me, a hand pressed over a smiling mouth, happiness spilling out. I said it solemnly, reverently. "I will, Grant. I love you so much." I've asked myself countless times whether I regret the choice I made back then. I've turned it over more times than I can count. And even if the ending wasn't what I'd wished for, I don't think I regret ever having loved. Those 12 years were the springtime of my life, the bravest chapter one ever wrote. Fate is cruel, but it is also merciful. Merciful in this, that as long as you keep walking forward, it gives you a road. I never wanted to lay eyes on Serena, but Grant had lifted her far too high, from a nobody had heard of into a huge star, and her face turned up everywhere in my life. When I bowed my head to look for the obstetrician's contact information, her news was pushed right in front of me. A selfie of her at a movie theater, another of a glittering villa, a whole row of jewelry and designer bags, still unopened, with a caption, "His apology wasn't half bad. This princess forgives him." Anyone could see that someone had booked out the entire theater just for her, and that the pile of jewelry was worth a small fortune. My face didn't change at all as I shut the phone. My heart had gone hollow long ago, not a ripple left in it. Just then a voice came from the entrance. I looked up. Grant was shrugging off his coat, bending to pick up his slippers. He seemed to feel me watching and lifted his eyes toward the sofa where I sat. "It's this late and you're still not asleep?" His voice was soft, the way a husband coming home after a long day gently greets his wife. I looked up at him and smiled. "You and Serena went to see a movie." Grant's hand paused. A little startled, he looked at me as if he suspected me of something. Why would I ask this? And that made sense. In all these years, it was the first time I had ever brought up Serena in front of him. After a stunned moment, he picked up the cigarette pack on the coffee table, slid one out, and the silver lighter threw off a sharp little spark. Grant leaned back into the sofa, a curl of smoke rising off his fingertips, his tired face narrowing as he squinted at me. "Does it bother you?" I looked at the cigarette in his hand, put my hand to my stomach out of habit, then thought better of it, and let it drop. "Back when it bothered me, did it ever bother you?" I asked him, half amused. He should have known I was talking about 4 years ago. That was the thing that became the beginning of the end for this marriage of ours. Back then, Serena was a fresh nobody, 18 years old, that beautiful, that young. Truly the finest age there is. She'd open her eyes wide and call him Mr. Prescott. Back then, I was so confident. Confident enough to believe that as long as Grant held the one line that mattered, no one else's noise could touch us. But in the end, I overestimated Grant's love for me, and I underestimated my own need to possess. He found her amusing, let her inch closer step by step, wished her good night every single night. Only I was like a madwoman, driven out of my mind because I cared too much. But back then he was too lazy even to argue with me. Only I put on an earth-shattering one-woman show. He'd just frown, impatient. "She threw herself at me. What am I supposed to do about it?" My eyes went red, and I paced the floor barefoot, my voice gone hoarse. If you'd never given her an opening, how would she have found a way in? If you hadn't been moved, where would she have gotten the nerve to challenge me? He looked at me, his voice cold to the point of frost. Madeline, right now you look exactly like a madwoman. In that instant, we went from the two people who loved each other most in the world to each other's most terrifying enemies. Out of the memory now, in the long silence of the empty hall, I opened my mouth again, my tones steady. Grant, let's get a divorce. Right then, the cigarette in his hand burned down to nothing. He didn't let go in time, and the ember caught his skin. He flinched, crushed the cigarette out, and only then dared lift his head to look at me. A single glance, and he dropped his eyes again, as if he couldn't bear to meet mine. His hand closed around the cigarette pack so hard it crackled, heavy and hollow. No one could know what he was thinking in that stretch of silence. It was a long time before he spoke, his voice catching. Is it because of Serena? He thought it over slowly. If you just say it bothers you, I can make her disappear. When had the once innocent Grant become this cruel, selfish creature? I asked him. She's still carrying your child. That is not my child. The corner of his mouth twisted into a sneer. Whatever she says, you believe. She says it's mine, so it's mine. Any child of mine could only be a Prescott. I cut him off calmly. I don't care. Serena or some other woman entirely. Right now, I don't care about any of it. So don't bother telling me these things. I only need you to agree to the divorce. Under the light, Grant's face was pale as paper, and a sick smile surfaced on it. Of course you don't care. Madeline, you're not the way you used to be. Even if I dropped dead in front of you right now, you wouldn't so much as blink. What is there left for you to care about? I had no appetite left for fighting with him. Watching him was like watching a stubborn child. I stood up and said, level and plain, about the divorce, I hope by tomorrow you can give me an answer I can live with. Grant's voice rose behind me, rough and hoarse. And if I don't agree? I stopped at the corner of the stairs, my hand pressing down on the rail, and turned to look back at him. The man I had loved in my girlhood slowly overlapped with the figure standing in front of me now, and I couldn't hold back the grief. Grant, all these years at your side, I haven't been happy for a single moment, and that kind of unhappiness has been taking my life from me, a little at a time. I let the tears fall and said each word to him clearly. Sometimes at night when I lie down to sleep, I wonder whether I'll be able to wake up the next day. We should have divorced 4 years ago. All these years wasted dragging it out. It was only because I couldn't stand to lose. I kept thinking, why should I be the one to hand another woman what's mine? Grant, like a lifeless statue, slumped back into the soft sofa, his proud head bowing low, his shape sinking into the dark. He didn't say another word. The next day, when I woke, Grant was gone. I looked at the empty villa and understood that he was hiding from me. I couldn't see why. It was this far along already. In the end, what more did he want? Having made up my mind to divorce, and having said it to his face, my mood was far lighter. The heavy thing that had been pressing down on me for years seemed to lift all at once. 3 days later, Prescott Group held a charity gala. Until the divorce was final, I still had to attend as Mrs. Prescott. That night, Grant was absent, as usual. No one could ever pin him down. But that night, I unexpectedly saw an old acquaintance. Not quite sure, I called out, "Elliot?" A man in a crisp, impeccable suit stood under the lights, aloof, gazing down at the floor with lazy indifference. In a blink he turned, his cold face warming just slightly. He hesitated, then stepped over, pressed his lips together politely and said, Madeline. I was a little surprised to see him here. I had sent out the VIP invitations myself this time, and I was certain I'd sent him one. But what surprised me was that he would come out to an event like this at all. Elliot was famous for how modest he was in the entertainment world. However many Best Actor trophies he held, however many signature roles had made his name, in that industry, he stayed as faint as an invisible man. His own fans half believed acting might only be his side job. I remembered one year, a rival dug into his life for 3 straight months and turned up nothing but his excellent record and his good deeds, which that time only lifted him to an even higher place. I figured that one way or another, Elliot had been Grant's college roommate. Maybe he'd come out of respect for Grant. Back in our dorm days, their gatherings, Grant always brought me along, so we were often around each other and knew each other well enough. I still remembered the first time at one of their dorm get-togethers, when Grant introduced me to Elliot, and we both caught the flicker of surprise in each other's eyes. Because before that, we'd already run into each other by chance, twice. But to keep it from being misunderstood, I stood behind Grant and glared at Elliot, and he played along without missing a beat. Back then, at our university, there was a legend. The computer science department had one handsome volcano and one cold, aloof iceberg. Grant, the sunshine, was the volcano, and Elliot, cold and proud, was the iceberg. Their grades were neck and neck, and outsiders were always comparing them. But the friends around them knew Grant and Elliot were true confidants, a gifted mind who by rights should have gone into academia. And then, in his graduation year, Elliot threw himself into show business and set off a storm at the university. Now that I thought about it after we graduated, I never once saw him on TV. I looked up at him and smiled and asked, "How have you been these past few years?" Elliot's eyes were lovely, with little points of light scattered in them. He nodded. "I've been well. It's been a long time." There was an awkwardness between us. I was about to excuse myself when Elliot suddenly spoke, his voice very soft, somehow touched with sorrow. "You haven't been happy these past few years?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, very impolite, even presuming. But the look on his face was utterly sincere. He was a man of that world. Of course he knew about Serena. And suddenly I remembered 2 years back, when Elliot had stirred up a wave online. Elliot was exactly as his fans described, a very silent person. The ones who slandered him, who used his name to ride his heat, he never gave a single glance. But that one time, when Serena borrowed his name to promote herself, he personally posted a statement shutting the rumor down. You couldn't have imagined that a man as cold as ice could bring himself to say those words. Thinking of it, I smiled at him. "You're right, but I'll be out of this misery soon enough." Elliot tilted his head toward me, a question in his eyes he didn't ask. He only curved his lips in something like congratulation. And the smile at the corner of my own mouth widened without my meaning it to. A smile from the bottom of my heart. In all these days, everyone who heard I wanted a divorce shook their heads and called me a fool. They always had a reason to talk me into holding on to this crumbling marriage, into keeping my seat as Mrs. Prescott steady beneath me. They'd tell me that Grant keeping a little mistress didn't mean he didn't love me. They'd say men are all like that. Is there a man alive who doesn't stray? As long as he still comes home, isn't that enough? This was the first time I'd heard the word congratulations. I raised my glass and happily clinked it against Elliot's. "Elliot, what did you say to my wife to make her this happy?" The voice dropped low over us, and a big hand settled at my waist. My whole body went tense in an instant, even the hand holding my glass stiffening. Grant pulled me into his chest, an intimate pose. I looked up into his flat, empty eyes. "Long time no see, Grant." Elliot glanced at me, then extended a hand toward Grant, polite and distant. Grant lifted his eyes off me and looked at Elliot with visible reluctance, the corner of his mouth curling. "Long time indeed. My people didn't treat you well tonight. Maddie and I have somewhere to be. We'll gather again next time you're free." Hearing that, I shot Grant a glance and saw his jaw drawn tight, though I couldn't tell what he was thinking. With nothing to say to Grant, I nodded to Elliot and stepped away first. What I didn't know was that behind me, Elliot called Grant back. He asked him, "Back then you loved her so much. I thought you'd always be good to her." Grant just stood there, his face cold as ice, his eyes on Elliot flickering with a dim rage, as if he could swallow the man whole. After a long moment, all at once, and without seeming to care at all, he smiled. "What does it have to do with you?" Grant couldn't have said what he himself was afraid of. Back in college, he'd known Elliot liked a type nothing like Madeline. He didn't wait for Elliot to answer, only left a cold line behind him. "Elliot, stay away from Madeline." After that gala, Grant seemed to vanish once more. I never imagined the next time I'd meet Grant would be like this. 5 in the evening, September 12th. At a downtown department store, a man took hostages, and I had the bad luck to be one of them, the tip of his knife pressed to my throat. The scene was chaos, people running for their lives, someone calling the police, but I couldn't let myself fall apart with them. I used every ounce of strength I had to steady my shaking body, forcing myself not to be afraid. The man screamed like a lunatic. "Don't come any closer or I'll kill her. Get the police here. Get the police here to talk to me." The one who reached me before the police did was Grant. He came tearing in from outside like a madman, his hair a wreck, and the moment he saw me, his face went white as death. Grant took a few steps forward and set the man off. "Don't come any closer." Grant steadied his feet, fought his own panic down, and made his voice firm. "I won't. You want money, don't you? Let her go and I'll give you whatever you ask. The police won't come after you. I can protect you." The man shouted at him. "I don't want money. I want justice. I want the police to come and settle this with me." Grant set everything on him down on the ground and held up his phone for the man to see. "Then let me trade places with her. I'm the chairman of Prescott Group. Taking me is worth far more. I can help you talk to the police." I stared at him, wide-eyed, forcing the words out. "Don't come closer." The man had a bomb strapped to his body. Grant kept talking him down. He'd always been good at persuading people, and the man, muddled in that moment, his mind clearly not right, actually listened to him and agreed to the trade. But as Grant walked up, the man pulled out a second knife and drove it viciously into Grant's arm to cut down his ability to fight back, then set the blade against Grant's throat and shoved me away with one hand. Grant looked at me, a long, deep look, and bent to cooperate with the man, his voice rough. "Run, get outside, don't look back." The police came fast. I grabbed at their hands and turned to look back at Grant, begging them to save him. They hauled me out by force. I sank into a crouch on the ground, my mind gone completely blank. That door didn't open from the inside, not until I couldn't hold myself up any longer and dropped to my knees. There was no explosion, the way I dreaded, and Grant wasn't gravely hurt. I braced myself against the steps, my face nothing but tears, and watched Grant walk out from inside, one hand clamped over his arm, come to me, and lift me up off the ground into his arms. I buried my face in his chest and cried until I couldn't breathe. For that short span, my heart was flooded with terror, and I called out to him, "Grant, I'm here." He bowed his head and answered softly. Crying, I asked him, "You aren't even afraid to die? For what? For what?" I didn't ask the rest. Grant went quiet and didn't ask the rest either, because we both knew what the unspoken words were. You aren't even afraid to die. So why don't you have the courage to love only one person your whole life? Grant, is loving just one person for a lifetime really so hard? I raised a hand and lightly patted my stomach, and through my tears, I said, "Sorry to the baby. I'm sorry I met you at such a wrong time. I'm sorry I can't bring you into this world." But then, at the hospital, I ran into Serena. That was how I learned that in this stretch of time she'd been dug up online over some ugly news, her career all but finished, a victim of her own doing. I like to keep an ear out for gossip, but I couldn't be bothered to needle her. Just as I turned to go inside, Serena suddenly spotted me and came lunging at me. I couldn't get out of the way in time, but the bodyguard with me caught her with one hand. She glared at me, vicious, and said coldly, "You put Grant up to it. You made him take my baby's life, didn't you?" I gaped at her, hardly able to believe it, and for a moment my throat closed up. Serena thrashed against the hold, her eyes going from sinister to bloodshot. "You want to divorce him too. After you leave, I've followed him all these years. The seat of Mrs. Prescott will be mine." Her voice broke. "Madeline. I'll admit it. At the very start, I got close to him for the money. I spent everything I had to seduce him, so he'd throw resources my way. But now I truly love him. I love him so much. I want to marry him. I want to spend the rest of my life with him." I cut her off, calm and cruel in my counsel. "Next time, don't be the mistress wedging herself into someone else's marriage. It really doesn't end well." I turned and left her screaming behind me. "Madeline, can you say something good about me to Grant? Tell him not to drive me away. Please?" Grant, as if he'd lost his mind, smashed everything in the room that could be smashed. In the end, one hand gripping his own waist, his finger trembling as he pointed it at me. "Madeline, why? That's our child." He dropped to his knees on the floor, buried his face in both hands, pressed his head against my lap, his shoulders shaking without stop. "Maddie, that's our child." I looked at him calmly. Grant, frantic now, was exactly like the frantic me of 4 years ago. But there was no flicker of gladness in my heart, only a grief without end. This child had been conceived on my birthday, in a moment when my heart went soft toward him and I let him cross the line. This child had been a mistake from the very start. I let out a breath. "Grant, let's get the divorce." "I won't agree," I asked him. "Or would you rather I stay by your side and die a little more each day?" At those words, Grant's eyes trembled at the very bottom. He stood frozen where he was, and all that was left in the look he turned on me was helplessness. Grant shut himself in the room for a whole day, the door locked tight. From dawn until the sun went down, he finally pushed the door open and came out. He looked at me, his tone level. "Maddie, I'll agree. Taking it to court is the one method I want least. I don't want it to turn ugly and shameful." That he could answer so calmly made me let out a breath of relief without meaning to. The divorce went through fast, only 3 days. What Grant gave me was enough to keep me free of worry for lifetimes. I'm no good at putting on a noble act and saying one don't need the money. So I took the card and accepted all of it. He owed me this. I thanked him. He leaned back against the sofa, his whole body spent, only his eyes still holding a little life. About 10 minutes later, out of nowhere, he said, "Maddie, it's late tonight. Stay one more night. I'll see you off tomorrow." I looked up at him and shook my head. "No need. My mother's coming to pick me up." At that, Grant shot to his feet. "Your mother's here? I'll go bring her up." Anxious, he pulled his coat up to go out. I called him back. "Grant, don't go." He stopped, puzzled, and looked at me. "In the past, every time my mother saw me, she'd have something good to say about you," I said, thinking it through as I told him. "She really did like you once, but you hurt her daughter. I don't think she'll want to see you." Grant gripped his coat so hard his knuckles went white, stepped back a few paces, and, defeated, sank back down onto the sofa. I pushed my suitcase toward the elevator. Grant kept his head down, not moving. I called to him once. "Grant." He lifted his head, answered, and gave me a smile. I'd thought that when the divorce came, it would be a scene ugly enough that no one could stand to watch. I never imagined that when this day arrived, we would give each other this much dignity. I smiled. I'm off. He wanted to see me out. I stopped him. With that door as the boundary line, we were split into two separate worlds. Who could understand the gloomy pictures I'd painted over these years? If it hadn't been that what I felt for the work was real love, I'd have given it up long ago. I thought back over these years of a marriage that never went right, and even the things I drew had come out carrying that same shadowed color. Divorce, I felt, was absolutely the right call. I scrolled down and saw a familiar handle. Beautiful work. I hope from now on you can be happy every single day. This handle belonged to an old fan of mine. In my second year of college, the first time I ever posted a piece, this person noticed me. After that, every single thing I put up, he quietly liked. And on every piece, he'd leave one line. Nice work. Keep it up. Even in the years when I was being condemned and cursed until I was covered in wounds, he kept it up too, still commenting, nice work. Don't give up. The corners of my mouth curved, and I replied to him with one word. Thank you. Come to think of it, it was strange. The person I ran into most often lately was Elliot. One time he was walking a dog. I stared at it for a long moment before I asked him, "Is this that dog?" In my second year of college, Grant and I had picked up an abandoned puppy outside the school and taken it in for a checkup. Ownership turned into a problem, and neither of us was a patient person to begin with, let alone then, when I was buried in drawing my comics. At the time, Elliot had offered to help sort it out. I'd assumed he would just give the dog away to someone. It never occurred to me that he'd raise it all the way up to this. Elliot smiled. Yes, it's old now. Doesn't go out walking much, to the point that it isn't even wary of strangers anymore. But later I learned that the dog Elliot raised was cold, just like him. It wouldn't let an ordinary person so much as touch it. In the grown-up world, it's easy to see through people's feelings, and Elliot, most of all, didn't hide his at all. In the end, all I could say to him was, "Elliot, I'm not ready for a new relationship. I really love the life I have now. And besides, I'm afraid of marriage." Elliot pressed his lips together and smiled. "Maddie, don't be afraid. When I tell you I like you, it isn't so you'll say it back. And it isn't to force you to be with me. I only hope that from now on, whenever you feel happy, and whenever you don't, you'll remember that somewhere in this world, there is still a person who is captivated by you, who is completely won over by you. That's how it was, and that's how it will always be." Sometimes I wonder how Elliot manages to blend that coldness and that warmth together so perfectly. 2 years later, the staff at Elliot's studio announced the happy news of his marriage. The searches exploded, everyone scrambling to find out who Elliot's wife was. Following the trail people left behind, the internet worked out that the woman Elliot was going to marry was the ex-wife of the chairman of Prescott Group. At one point, a person online couldn't accept it and cursed him. Why go and marry another man's wife? Some even crawled over to Prescott Group's page to sling insults, and Prescott Group simply locked the comments. Finance reporters caught wind of it and wanted to seize the chance to interview Grant, to ask how he felt. After his silence, a fan dug up Elliot's secret little account and uncovered a secret he'd kept hidden for years. On that little account he had once posted, "If she could stand up high enough, could she see it?" In no time, the internet was churning with debate all over again, and more than a few writers started spinning out the tangled love story of three people, Elliot, Madeline, and Grant. I looked down at the analyses from the online detectives at the head of the pack, tapped that familiar handle on my screen, then grabbed my phone and ran barefoot into the kitchen. Elliot, in a set of pale gray clothes, was bent over cutting fruit for me. I tried saying it out loud. "Timeless moon." Elliot, absorbed in the plate of fruit, answered on instinct. A second later, his body went rigid, and he turned to look at me, then turned right back around and said, "Lo, I don't know what you're talking about. Hurry up and put your slippers on." I looked at the phone, at the person named Timeless Moon, then at Elliot, and cupped my chin and laughed out loud. And behind me came that free, extravagant laughter, and Elliot couldn't hold it back and laughed along. Now, here's how it looked from Grant's side. On the day of the wedding, Damon came straight from the airport. Stepping out of the car at the door, he ran into a face he knew. He checked his watch. He wasn't so late that it mattered, so he walked over and clapped the man on the shoulder. "Not going up to see it?" Grant looked at the cigarette in his hand, then lifted his eyes to the grand building, the guests hurrying in, the gongs and drums ringing to the sky. He took out a small box and handed it to Damon. "Wedding gift. Take it up for me." Damon took the box and frowned. "What is it?" Grant choked on his smoke and coughed for a long while, coughed until his eyes watered before he laughed and said, "Afraid she won't take it." At the end, he added one instruction. "Don't tell her it's from me." Damon asked once more. "You really won't go up?" Grant shook his head. "See what? Watch them vow in front of everyone to grow old together? Watch the way they look at each other in love?" He probably just couldn't accept it. The person you once set at the very top of your heart, the one you treasured that much, the one you loved with everything you had, finally held in someone else's arms. Damon patted his shoulder. "I'll go up and raise a glass for them." Maybe because Damon had never had her to begin with, the ache wasn't so hard for him to let scatter. He didn't come apart the way Grant did. Damon watched Grant walk slowly into the crowd, his back lonely and desolate, and smiled a smile no one could hear. Something told him that in this life Grant would never let go either, and this was only the beginning. Grant got into the car and looked up, dazed at that building. He'd never have guessed that Elliot had buried his feelings for so many years. When he finally understood, he hated that he couldn't kill the man. Grant lowered his head and suddenly smiled, laughed until his chest shook. He would never tell Madeline that her favorite birthday gift, a box packed full of comics, the one she called the most thoughtful present anyone had ever given her, was the gift he'd meant to give her that year, but hadn't managed to get to her in time. It was Elliot who had quietly put that gift together and passed it to him to hand over. And when Madeline left, she hadn't taken that treasured gift with her. She'd left it to gather dust in the villa. He would never tell her either, that the year she was buried under vicious rumors and dragged through the filth, before he could even move to deal with it, Elliot had already handled every last piece of it. Back then, Grant had clapped him on the shoulder and called him a good brother, and Elliot had said nothing at all, and Grant had gone right on believing it was for his sake that Elliot had stepped in. Now looking back, every word, every syllable was like a knife driven straight into his chest. As long as he lived, he would never tell Madeline the things Elliot had done. He would let them rot along with him and his secrets. He was selfish enough that he didn't want to give the two of them any reason at all to love each other even more deeply. The car pulled slowly into the night, and Grant drifted farther and farther from all that light and noise. And Damon had seen that same wedding from a place of his own. When Damon reached the banquet hall, he was just in time to catch Madeline's "I do." It was the second time he had stood in a sea of people and wished her happiness. After Madeline's divorce, half in earnest and half in jest, he'd once asked her whether she could ever marry again. She'd laughed and said, "Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I'm still young. I can still be loved if fate decides to be kind to me. I'm not the sort of person who quits eating just because she choked once." Turning it over, Damon decided this was the real Madeline. After all these years, she somehow still hadn't changed, still that brave, still that full of fire. He held the gift box in his hand and said, "Happy wedding," and gave her the present, a jade necklace worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. He didn't need to say whose it was. Anyone could guess. Madeline took it and said nothing, only looked at him. Damon shoved his hands in his pockets, shrugged, and smiled. "Don't hold it against me. Someone asked me to." The truth was that over these years, he'd hated Elliot more than he'd ever hated Grant, because deep down, he kept thinking, what did Elliot have that he got to be the one to keep her? And even now, in this very moment, he was still turning it over carefully in his mind. Thank you all for listening.